Thank you very much for joining us this morning. You are joining us from London, from UK. Anyway, you will tell us where you are joining us from. I'm in
Yes,
Italy.
of course.
I'm really
Yes.
happy to talk to you. So why don't we start
Thank
with a
you.
small presentation of yourself? Tell us a little thing about
Okay.
you.
Okay, my full name is Oluwayemisi Olayinka Majekodunmi, and I'm based in the United Kingdom, England, of course. And basically, my background is has been in mental health. I've always enjoyed serving people, and my work has always been hands-on with people. I don't really like sitting behind a computer. I actually work with grassroots. So I've worked with for many years with Black and ethnic minorities surviving mental health challenges. So I've seen people broken and restored back to work, career, whatever. And I found huge fulfillment in this. However, my turning point came, my greatest challenge has been when I lost my husband in 2013. However, I was actually quite fortunate in the sense that because I'd come from a healing and restorative background with people, all what I'd abused to empower people and build them back up emotionally, I used it to build myself back up. So, and one of the main premises of my growth and strength has been my faith, which has always been with the work I do and what I am today. So that's me in a nutshell. So I became a widow in 2013. And so my vision for my life took a turn in that I decided to start empowering women who've lost their spouses. But what I did as well is I remember a few months into my husband's passing, I said to myself and to my two children, we will not be defeated by this. And I said to myself, I've always believed in matrimony, and when it's right again, I would want to marry again. So I would never close my heart to love again. So that was my driving force. So as I built myself back up during my walking, when it came to 1 year, I remember it was a huge milestone for me because I remember looking back and I thought, wow, I'm still here. I've survived it. So I started writing my book. And the title of my book was Walking Out of Widowhood. In writing my book, it was quite raw, but it was very therapeutic for me because it was I could express myself and all the pain and all the ups and downs and challenges. But what was always stable in my life and always is my faith. And when I talk about my faith, even when I talk on platforms, I don't just talk about faith with no actions. I talk about faith that has to be fearless. You have to act on your faith. I believe God would not do anything for you if you do not step out and do something. If you do pray, but you have to step out and walk into the river, into the sea. So I wrote the book a year later. I didn't publish it. I didn't produce it until just over a year ago when we came into the furlough, which is the job retention scheme in England. I became furloughed for a year and a half, and that gave me more time to refine my book and separate perhaps the emotional bits and speak more about the solutions I want to give women. Because I find many times it's so easy to dwell on the pain and not find a solution. So my book is more about how you can find your way out of widowhood and how you can strengthen yourself and find purpose out of it. Because I feel I found purpose out of it. So that's my story in a nutshell. It's been 8 years. It'll be 8 years this December. And I say to widows, and I'm saying it again around the world, you can dare to dream a greater dream. And when I say that, I say, people talk about recovery, I'll talk a bit more in that in terms of the work I do. I talk about recovery in terms of not just what you lost, but even greater than what you had before, because there are dreams we didn't have before that you would even find greater ones from even your loss. Recovery is a gradual step. It is not suddenly. I'm not saying you recover within a day or two or a few months, but the main focus is to positively try and find your way out of loss. That's my story in a nutshell. Andy, back to you.
Thank you very much, dear Yemi. I really find a lot of value in what you are saying, and I believe this podcast is going to be filled with a lot of value also because you are speaking from your heart. Any person that is listening can really see that you are speaking from your heart. That is what is very important at the end of the day because
Thank
we
you.
are communicating, we are connecting, we are trying to put our life out there to also help other people because we are not alone in this world. Whatever it is that is happening to you, some other persons. Is also experiencing it. So the reason we share is that we let the other person out there know that hey, you are not alone. we can journey together because other people like you have overcome this. It might not necessarily be about the loss of a loved one in this case. It might be a loss of job. It might be a catastrophe. It might of any kind of category, you know. But the point, and the very important point there to note, is that whatever is happening to you, you are not alone. So this is very important. If I were you were talking about purpose, I remember the work of Victor L. Franco, A Man's Search for Meaning. That is a very important book also, no? In that, you know, in life, things happen to us that we do not anticipate. Because this is also probably what is the most beautiful thing about life, in that there is no template. You're not going to find the template for your life, that how you are going to go from when you were born to the day you die. It doesn't happen like that. You are basically going to be working out every day, trying to construct your life in your falling and in your rising. So I think it is really very important, the conversation that we are having today, and also the work that you are doing. All right, because this podcast is mainly also about the people, your life, your journey, because we want to reach out to people and also try to document their passes. I would like to start with you. By your name, Yemi, of course, I'm already saying that that is a Yoruba name, that is from Nigeria automatically. Were you born in Nigeria or were you born in the UK? Tell us a little bit about that, because I would like to trade on that.
I was born in England. I was born in Manchester, and I left when I was 7, and I lived in Nigeria till secondary school age, and I came back to do my 6th form here. And I've been here more or less studying and working, going back to visit, but I've basically been based in the UK since I was 16 when I came back.
Thank you for that. The reason for that also, you might ask, well, it is important because we are trying to connect. If we are trying to connect, for us that are coming from Africa, that means those that are coming from Africa in the recent years, even your parent, of course, I'm talking of the last 100, 200 years. Of course, we don't have any, okay, we still have challenges connected to our roots, no? But to those who have left before, talking of maybe slavery, who do not know where they are coming from in Africa, who of course know that they are from Africa, it is very challenging for them. So it is very important that we always try to connect to our roots. That is why, of course, just pronouncing your name, I know you are in Nigeria and also know where you are coming from in Nigeria. So it becomes also automatic for us. Now, what you do is very therapeutic and very deep and very important. Is there any way that it have anything to do with your root, where you are coming from? Maybe the story that your parent told you, or is it because of your education in the UK?
I think in terms of the work I've done, I'm not there at the moment. I'm still on furlough. I should have gone back. Anyway, it was set up, the history of my organization was set up for Black and ethnic minorities, African and Afro-Caribbean adults with enduring mental health problems in the United Kingdom, because there was a huge percentage of people of color that were breaking down in the system, going into hospital, but we're always coming out and going back in. So what had happened is there was a pastor who had a vision to set up the organization to cater for such adults. So my work is basically being with people from Afro-Caribbean people for over 20 years. And what I found in doing that is when coming to the day center as a Black and ethnic minority organization, they flourished because of the cultural connection. So number one, there were people, the majority that were there looked alike. It alleviated the isolation that many ethnic minority groups sometimes feel or get in the United Kingdom. Recovery was quicker. And then we found a lot of professionals used to come to our doors and ask if we would take people that had been sick for years. But maybe they came to the project. Within a year, there was an absolute turnaround. We provided lunch every day. So that made people, even just the taste, the smells, the music. And we had people who were professionals that came back and couldn't believe the transformation in such service users. So there's a connection there. And I believe because of my faith, I feel I was ordered somehow to work in that project. And it's been one of the best blessings I've ever received from working there, because I was working with people within an ethnic minority setting. So even though I was born here, my roots are still in Africa and from Nigeria. Because I remember when I initially started as a deputy support worker, I used to go into hospitals, and I remember seeing people of color. Some of them we don't have had any visitor for years, and I would end up asking the nurses and then give her a leaflet, and then when they get discharged, they will come to our organization, and they just thrived basically. So that's the background of my work. So I've always worked with grassroots, but in this profession, I worked with people of color. And I still do it today. I find, even as much as I talk about widows, I find I've got a Facebook group, but it's a very international forum. As much as I'm based in the United Kingdom, I notice a lot of African Americans are drawn to me, to the work I'm doing. And I'm presently linking with a lady in Kenya as well. So thank God for the internet. So it makes my work internationally relevant. As much as widows face loss and pain, there's an international relevance. And another angle to that is when I produced my e-notes, which is Working Out of Widow, it's a shorter version of the book. I had to re-edit it because I wanted to give an international perspective. Because when you live in the West and you're British or born in a Western country, you're privileged to have access to a lot of resources. Whilst knowing where my parents come from, many widows are not fortunate. And I'm aware, obviously, there's a lot of suffering, rejection, so much abuse to widows, especially in developing countries. And that's another angle I added into my e-notes, and which I'm exploring. And in the future, adding to the vision of how I can connect with widows in such developing countries. The remit is massive, because the remit at the moment is widows ages 35 to 55. But I'm sure there's somewhere along the line I'm going to connect with widows from international settings as well, because there's a lot of suffering and there's a lot of stigma. What I talk about a lot as well when I'm on platforms is when a woman is widowed and she's ready to marry, no one should chastise her or judge her because she wants to get married. No one has the right to say to a widow, you're meant to stay like that all your life. Who are we to say that? As long as you have life, and from a faith perspective as a Christian, the Bible says, when death do us part, when we have parted in death, a woman or a man can go and get remarried. So that's another angle I tend to talk about. It's a huge remit, but I'm sure the Lord who's given me this role has made me able. So that's it so far. I'll hand it back to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Yemi. Now, I'm still trying to maybe ask you one or two questions there.
Okay.
In the early period, no, in where you were still growing up, trying to find your path, no, because I believe that life is a journey. Like I was saying before, we don't have any template. Like maybe when you were, but it's true that in Africa, of course, the parents do a lot to try to tell the parent, this is what you have to do. No, when you are going to school, you are going to be a lawyer, you are going to be a doctor. So they are very keen on that, no. But that is just the profession. But life is not only a profession. Life is a whole lot of things put together. When this is happening, you are not putting pieces together. You are building. It's like an edifice, a structure. You are putting block on it, one brick, one after the other, until the end of your life. Life is an interesting journey. I look at it like a journey. All right. Now, when you were much smaller, I'm talking of the young Yemi and Manchester.
Yeah.
What was your whole kind of vision? Like, what were you saying that this was going to be my trajectory, more or less?
What I can say, I must say, I don't really remember much about when I was younger in Manchester, but I remember when I was 7 and I landed in Nigeria, and I remember a lot of people had a lot of baskets on their heads. It was like total different setting. But I ended up I was privileged to have a good education. I went to a boarding school in Nigeria. So I lived among culture, obviously, grassroots. But I was placed in a very remote part of Nigeria, which was the village. And what I do remember is that I was always one who would speak out. I always played devil's advocate. So no matter what people were talking about, everyone would share their views. But I would always like people to view it from another perspective. I never felt there was always one or two perspectives. I was always there to try and stir something new, create another angle, because nothing we say is absolute. So I remember always being, and then I was quite interactive. I was a very social individual. Even in school, when I was in secondary school, I had quite a few friends, but I was more or less always I was always in the background with friends, but I knew my teachers didn't know me, because I remember one particular incident. I don't know if I did quite well in one subject or something happened where they wanted a prefect. And I remember I was sitting in front in the class, and the teacher was asking, who is so-and-so? And everyone was laughing, thinking, how come he doesn't know who I am? So I raised my hand, but I think they were trying to look for a timekeeper, because to wake people up in the morning. Anyway, I finally had to do that, which was me waking up at 5 o'clock and ringing the bell. But I've always played in the background. I've never necessarily wanted the limelight. I've always stirred and empowered people in the background. But as I'm seeing now, I'm obviously talking to you on this program, but I find I've always enjoyed working with people. And another thing I remember is when I was at home, I used to really enjoy entertaining people, like cooking meals, having people around, just gathering people together. I've always enjoyed that as well. And I've always enjoyed eating healthy food. That I remember very clearly. And I've never been afraid to speak up. I've always stood alone in terms of being an advocate to say what is truth. Even whatever is going to cost me, I would say it. I refine it. I learned to become more tactful. When I was younger, I was a bit tactless. But as I've become more matured, I've refined what I say and become more tactful. But you would always hear Yemi say what other people are afraid to say, as they say, the elephant in the room. But it always tends to generate conversation and opens people up, because we live in a world where there's a lot of fear, even in small settings, in workplaces. And that's why I'm doing coaching as well. There's a lot of people, whatever echelon you're in, voices are not heard all the time. People always limit what they have to say. I've had it in so many settings. People will say things to me. You get to bigger forums, they say, hear your view, no one says anything. So I tend to say some of the things, and so on and so forth. So that's what I can remember.
All right. Now, why do you think people don't really say what they mean? In fact, this is one of the problems actually that we have around. We just sort of make a lot of people pretend, no? Is it because they don't want to offend somebody, or they don't know enough, or they just are not taught to speak? Because speaking also is a big thing. It's very important in our economy today, because this is an economy that is based on connecting, communication, customer service. It is more important than ever before. So why do you think people, of course, like you said, when you were growing up, it was very easy for you to speak your mind. This is what we are saying. We really should speak out our mind, say it. Of course, you are not going to be right all the time. If you are wrong, just accept that you are wrong, then move on from there. But it is important. It is more important for you to speak and be wrong. I never say anything. You don't have any opinion. You are just like, I support. You cannot always support. Say your own, stand for your own sometime. So why do you think, of course, because you made mention of coaching, which of course we are going to get to later in the podcast, and so I'm just throwing that one in conversation. So why?
I think being in a lot of cultural settings, especially, I find mainly can be quite cultural. Like in some cultures, children are raised to be quiet and just listen. So you find even when they start to socialize, I remember when I used to take people out, because I used to take a lot of women out for meals and stuff like that, part of my work. When we were gathered, I noticed some people would not say anything. And in studying them, they had a lot to say, but they were not used to cultivating that habit to speak where people were gathered. It's only with time they came out of their shells. So there's a cultural issue. Then number two, there's confidence. Confidence in perhaps afraid people might not really relate to them. Perhaps you're not sure what you're saying, or perhaps not really believing in yourself. So these are things that have to be nurtured as children, or even where we are in work settings. Sometimes people are suppressed as well, unconsciously in work settings, where in the suppression, your confidence is killed. It's only when you come out and maybe go for counseling or coaching, you realize, oh my goodness, I've been duly limited in many ways. And then there's also the issues around perception, race, gender, and how you define yourself. So in terms of gender, if you're not empowered as a female, depending on your background, you might get to settings where you're with women and you don't have a voice. You might have what you're thinking, but you might not be able to verbalize it because you're not so sure if it's the right setting or what people would say. So there are numerous issues, so many issues. But what I would say, however, is when we become adults and when we are in places of power, especially if you have governance, you're in charge of governance with staff and teams, it's always important to cultivate a culture where people can speak out. No matter even if it's not what you want to hear, but it always engineers growth. Wherever people are not allowed to speak, there can never be growth. And people go backstabbing and speaking and whispering and everything. And it creates an atmosphere of fear, which isn't the best place to grow in or to thrive in.
Yeah, that is good. Growth is very important. This is the last question I'm going to ask you here before we move to your professional level now,
Okay.
where you are.
Okay.
Now, always in this aspect of communication, which is speaking out, you are in both world, both in Europe and also in Africa, in that you both understand this word. And we are more concerned about the African setting, because we are both from Nigeria. And we know that this is a problem that we have in Nigeria because I have another podcast that is dedicated to African and also an African leadership, something like that. So we talk a lot about our leaders. And one of the problems that we have complained a lot about is the communication level. That most of our leaders in Africa, not all, of course, I do enjoy their speech sometimes, but some of them do not really verbalize the thing very well. They don't master the communication skill very well. Speaking of Nigeria, for example, it can even be during the time of Obasanjo, Goodluck Jonathan, or even the current president that we have today. We know that there have been a defect in terms of communication. That is at the political level. But of course, this can trickle down to our everyday life, Or maybe is it because we are speaking English? I don't understand if that is the problem, or because it's not just part of our culture. But that cannot also be true because our culture is very verbal, as it were, You look at maybe the Yoruba or the Igbo or the Hausa, or even in my local tradition, for example, Esa, people speak a lot. But when it comes to articulating the issue at a formal level, it becomes a little bit an issue. So one time I was interviewing an educationist in South Africa, and I was saying, why we don't hear African leaders when they go to the United Nations, instead of going there to mago, that is how the Nigerians say, to mago English, that they do not speak very well. Why can't they just speak their language? This way they will articulate it perfectly. Because in the language, you can make some idiomatic expression, you can make some jokes, you can play on words. That is what make it beautiful. If you look at big orators, sorry to use him as an example because it's not really a good example, but he's very good in this particular area. Like Hitler, when Hitler speaks, everybody is listening. So people of that, because that is a very powerful thing that happens when you talk, when you are able to really control the conversation.
I don't really like to comment on politics because it's a big area in itself. However, comparing certain countries where people do not speak, I still believe it's about the structure, the opportunity, and access. So if there's because it's amazing how people don't realize how powerful they are when they're in positions of authority. So if you don't create a structure where the media is fully free to express itself, how would people actually be able to submit articles or express their views through the media? If you create a country where you haven't created a structure where young people are mentored into leadership, where they can actually speak in different areas, people are not going to speak. If you create an area where unconsciously there's oppression, hidden oppression, unspoken oppression, or an impression that only those who are affluent and powerful have a say, the effect is what we get: lack of communication, lack of fear. It happens in every country at different levels. However, in certain countries, there's more access, there's more opportunity to speak up, there's more freedom of the press, and so on and so forth. And I'm looking at the world as a whole, but the most important thing is it's the leaders. What are leaders saying? What access are they giving? What are they saying to the people? What are they allowing the people? And so on and so forth. That's
All
what
right.
I was saying.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to drag you on politics because, of course, we all have different sensibilities. So,
Yeah.
all right. Now, let's look at one of your area, which is mental health a profession.
Yeah.
What would you like to say about that as because you are an expert in that area? Oh,
Yeah.
you
What I
say,
would,
okay, please go.
what I would say, as much as I've worked in mental health for over 20 years, the mind, the brain still baffles me. However, what I would say is the most important thing is being able to access support when people are emotionally vulnerable and broken. Number two, the amount of support you have around you ensures your speedy recovery. Number three, there's always a cultural need and provision for people who come from different ethnic groups in terms of their recovery and treatment. Not all recovery or treatments, and when I say treatment, I'm talking about social care, even medication would treat all people. All these have to be incorporated. But what I have seen is when you provide the appropriate service to people who need it culturally, they thrive quicker. In terms of mental health as well, there are other factors that can create mental distress. But what I would say, number one, is a lot of us internalize pain. Internalized pain, the pain could be anything from what I'm talking about today, being a widow. It could be racism, lack of promotion at work, so on and so forth. But you don't go and talk to someone, get help. Many of us try to keep up appearances, and this goes across the board. You could be in an executive position, but you know there's certain things you get to the limit of what you can do, but yet your funders are putting pressure. You need to get support. You need to connect. We see it in the church sometimes as well. People are leaders, but they don't have board members that can support them, or they don't create a fence of support around them. So that's where, I've heard of people who have been in authority, leaders who have just walked out because they become mentally distressed. So the most important thing is being aware of your limits. Even when you're a president or you're a leader or you're a manager, we all have our limits. But before you get to your limit, it's very important to create structures around you that can empower and support you when you need to bounce ideas and distress the burden of what is being laid at your shoulders. Because the higher we go, the more human beings expect a lot from us, but they forget we're all human. And also when we look up to leaders, wherever they are, we've got to remember they're human as well. So there's no perfection in man. We gain strength from connecting with each other and being transparent as well, because being transparent allows you to be more accountable and actually eases your mental health stress. You don't carry everything by yourself, but share it and unburden it and delegate, because some people do not know how to delegate, and that causes mental distress as well.
Thank you very much for that. You see, this is a very important conversation that I think we really need to talk about. No, I don't know how much we can take on it today, which is mental health. No, because from a cultural point of view, it's not even something that we talk about a lot in Africa and among the African diaspora, because that is our target. No.
Yes.
Because sometimes we easily misunderstand mental health for spiritual problem, no? That when somebody is having mental disturbance, we easily say, okay, maybe this person is being attacked spiritually. So the solution, therefore, is let's go and pray and all that, no? Instead of looking for a way to try and understand what is really going on there. So I don't know, because you have been in this area for over 20 years, what is your reaction to that, to the perception, how people see it? Because first of all, it even start with, if we consider it a problem, and what kind of a problem is it for us, that determine what kind of a solution we are prescribing. So what is your take on that?
Mental health is a very controversial topic because from the faith point of view, people would argue that you can't be in Christ or know the Lord and have a mental health problem. But I would dispel that myth, because not all issues around mental health is to do with someone possessed and so on and so forth. Mental health many times is distress. And what I found in my line of work is many people from the diaspora of Africa, or people of color or other groups, because of the issue around stigma, they don't access help very quickly. So for example, if your child or son has a challenging problem, because they're afraid of what the society might think, they might decide to keep taking the person to spiritual prayers and not access practical help as well. But what I've learned, the longer you leave it, the worse it becomes. And when I say the worse it becomes, many times it's when the person starts running out into the street, then everyone starts to wonder, we didn't know this person had a challenge, or so on and so forth. So it's about combining the help you need therapeutically, medically, and the spiritual side. Because I always give an example. Like there was a case of someone who went away and was on medication for many years, but forgot the medication in a country. And when he was coming back, he broke down and he was running around the airport. So I say to people, when people argue against the medical model, I say, if he's to get therapeutic help and counseling, he won't be able to sit down to listen to hearing therapists because he's running around and shouting all over the place and taking off his clothes. Something has to sedate or manage that emotion at that time. Obviously, that's an extreme case. But I tend to find that the sooner you access support, be it counsel, talking therapy, or talk to someone, the sooner the main problem can be resolved. Many times and I know there are clinical cases where there's an imbalance in the brain when people have studied that and so on and so forth. But in my practical experience, the sooner, when you find you're mentally distressed, it's important to access help. I even find, like, for example, in bereavement, many times people would say they can't sleep, they can't do this, they can't do that. And they won't tell family, they won't tell anyone. And when you ask them, they'll say, oh, I don't want to worry them. But you do have to tell someone, because that means you're internalizing all the pain yourself. There's nothing wrong in seeking help and so on and so forth. However, in some countries, the mental health services are not, and they're not very good. So that could engineer a lot of fear. So when people feel they're becoming distressed, or there might be a mental health problem, a clear, maybe schizophrenic diagnosis, people might not want to access services because they know the services are not so good. Or even where they are so good, if you're afraid, if you're a person of color in Western countries, many people think they don't want to go to the hospital because they treat them different. There's so many different stories. But part of my work has always been to accompany people to the gatekeepers, which we call GPs, doctors, and be present at meetings and speak on behalf of people when people cannot speak. Or if you find there's a tendency for people to already have preconceived ideas about certain cultures and so on and so forth. So advocacy is very important, to bring someone along. I found times when you do go with people listen more, they give you more time because you've accompanied the person. Whilst many times people have gone on their own and they don't really get the outcome until you actually go with them. And so it goes on. But mental health is a huge topic. It's a phenomenal, controversial topic. But self-care is very important. And do not pretend that things are not happening to you when you know you need help.
Like I said, this is a very important conversation, because if we were to look at the African diaspora alone, it's an issue that is happening all over. Go to any street, go to any train station, basically, because of course, that is the point of entry and exit. So we usually, that is where we know most of the cases, no? Because in our language, it is said that Let me say it in my language, then I will translate it to you.
Okay.
Meaning the man person mad with what he knows. Because of course, the
Mm.
prayer, like you said, is a very powerful instrument. We've been living in this earth for very many thousands of years. Until now, those that have studied the brain are still discovering a lot of the perhaps we are not even gotten anywhere in understanding how the brain how the brain functions, which means that we
Yes.
cannot just simply say we know. We don't know enough.
Mm.
So this is a problem that we have all across. So to say that because we are African, we don't suffer what other people suffer, I don't think that is even a good enough as an excuse. Because now I would even like us to take the argument back to our culture. Um, is it even possible? Let me first of all ask you, then I will see if I need to say anything about that. Is there any explanation of mental health in our culture? Help me even with the Yoruba culture, for example, because I know how it is treated in my culture.
As far as I know, I'm not. So what I do know is that where there's mental health issues, sometimes people are not treated as they should do. And many times it depends on your access to medication and being able to pay for the right specialist care. And there's been extreme cases where people even are confined in certain places and not really treated. And that means they're getting worse. And there's still issues around possession and deliverance. I am a Christian. I believe there are prayers we can pray about deliverance and healing. However, you won't be able to pray for a person who keeps running around and shouting and taking their clothes off. They need to be calmed first. It's in calmness that you can even pray. It's in calmness that you can actually have a consultation with a doctor or psychotherapist. There has to be some kind of medication that will calm you down if it's got in a very extreme case. So all the elements can work together, because the organization I worked for it was a Christian organization, and I found no matter how ill people became, because there was a spiritual side to it. That's what also enhanced recovery. However, we didn't just depend on that. We linked people with their GPs. We drew up care plans of what their needs are. Like a lot of people had financial problems. Housing was a huge problem, which created a lot of distress. We had young women that were due to have babies and the roof would just cave in a one-bedroom flat. We had to link in with housing services. There was issues around education. They go to university. People feel isolated because they've come from a predominantly culturally based setting, and they go in a predominantly white setting and there's not enough support. They break down. There's been so many issues. So what I'm just trying to say is there has to be holistic working, professionals, spiritual leaders, everyone has to come together and work. So it's not about just one thing, because one's mental distress can be caused by different things. So the church could pray for you, but no one wants to be prayed for if they're hungry. I've heard people say, don't pray for me yet, I haven't had dinner. So you have to sit them down, give them food. Yes, or I haven't had a shower for 7 days and you want to pray for me. You won't even be able to pray for the person. You have to shower them. So what I'm trying to say is about holistic walking and different groups complementing each other in providing care.
All right, that is very important. It's very important that to highlight the fact that the causes of mental health is not just one thing, because we're looking at the human being, and the human being is very complex. I think this is also one of the things that I like about the holistic approach to illness, to treatment of illness. No, of course, I understand maybe based on the Western tradition of healing that you need to actually isolate. Maybe somebody is having an eye problem, then we go and treat that eye. No, that is how they do it. That is the logic. No, you go and isolate the eyes and see what is the defect in the eye. Then you go and resolve the problem. And sometimes the person can see well. But there is another approach, which is the one you are saying, which is the healing, because you don't heal the eyes, you heal the body, because the eyes is part of the body. Maybe the problem is not really the eyes. The problem is coming from somewhere, but manifested in the eyes. If you then know what the problem is, you solve the problem, then the eyes, of course, gradually we get the problem resolved. Okay, where I'm going here is that by cultural understanding, I'm trying to say that those who think that mental health, they have stigma towards it, is that it is not something to be ashamed about because, like I said, the brain is very powerful. Sometimes just by miscalculation, you can be seeing things that you're not supposed to be seeing or that don't make any sense to you. Then if you are interpreting what you are seeing, then to somebody who is not seeing what you are seeing, you are out of your senses because we have limited information. In our culture, for example, you remember, you know this one.
Yes.
The role of psychology is not something new. It has been here for a very many years. No, that is what we know as the soothsayer. There are those who are the seers, for example. These people are doing exactly the role that psychologists do. Either maybe you were sleeping, you had a dream, and in this dream, you see somebody pursuing you. This person probably had a cutlass. Somebody is holding a cutlass, is going to cut off your neck. That is what you see in the image of your dream. And you wake up now, you are scared. And perhaps in your dream, there is also the face of the person that was pursuing you. Now, what are you going to do? If you are not strong enough, you just take the person that is pursuing you. You go and shoot the person so that you don't have, the person doesn't go to kill you. But that might not actually be the picture. That might not actually be what is happening there. That is why you need an expert. In the pre-Christian era, for example, you just need to see the seer, somebody who is able to know beyond you. And what do these people do usually? They come to talk to you. And what do the psychology do today? They talk to you. They listen to your story. They ask you a lot of questions. And from what you tell them, they're able to prescribe something for you to do. And of course, maybe in the typical African tradition, they might tell you to go do this and do that and do that. But they are not crazy. They are reading you. They are reading from what you are telling them. You see? So I am trying to say that even in the traditional African system, there are ways to overcome some of these things. Because I don't remember having so many crazy people in my village, for example. Of course, there are, sometimes it does happen. But it's not so many like in the city where I live, there are a lot of Africans that I know just roaming the street. They have got it not, no? So we cannot simply say this is a spiritual case. This is what I'm saying, that this thing does happen. And like you said before, we don't only have to talk about it when it have got it out of her. It have got it beyond the limit this time. But when it was just growing up, that is why the communication is very important. We need to talk to one another so that we know what is happening in our brain. This way we can begin to visit why it's just getting off. Because when it is finally off, it becomes very difficult. Now, looking around your area where you are in the UK, what do people tell you that make them not to talk about it? Because at a point, you have to open up. What did they tell you is the reason that make them not to talk about it?
I think what it is people who have mental health problems or have experienced it, they want to talk about it, but the society many times are afraid or there's a stigma about it. So like in cases I came across, even when people wanted to go back to work, if there's such a long gap of you being unemployed, you have to account for that period, for example. So if people say they were this, that, the employer won't take them. So they had to set up projects where employers were aware of the history and then they would take them on. But that shouldn't really be the case, because even when people have had a mental health challenge and they're now quite stable and the doctor says they're able to return to work, what should really happen is when you get the employment, there should be support systems in the employment setting for that individual. They shouldn't necessarily have to go and work on a project which many times is like volunteering anyway, it's not even paid. So it's not always about the individual, it's about society. Society easily alienates people who say they have mental health problems because they're afraid, or perhaps they're afraid it might happen to them. Anything that they don't want to happen to them, sometimes people avoid or just separate themselves from it. It's the same, it's very similar with grief. In England, when you go through grief, after the funeral and everything else, people really don't really know what to say to you. What people do sometimes, you might even be walking down the road and people will cross onto the other side because they don't know what to say. And that tends to be many cases with mental illness as well. I think it's like maybe a germ. They'll catch the germ or the bug. But in terms of, can I just mention something about a lot of people roaming around as well, is many times, like in England, what I find is there's a lot of opportunities and there's a lot of lack of opportunities as well. So like where there hasn't been, where some people have gone to school, got the qualifications, but then they now want to seek work. They might get the work, but many times it might be grades lower than what they're meant to be working for. But they have a family. They can't provide for the family, especially during the period where the partner is just having children. So the pressure of lack of finance creates pressure on the marriage. The marriage might break down. What happens? Maybe the man leaves the home or is kicked out of the home. There's more support for women than men in England. So when you're a single male of a certain age, you're more vulnerable because you might not end up having a proper housing. You might end up in one single room. And those can create mental distress. And then if you were one where there were issues in the home, you might not even have access to your children. So you've come from family and now you're on your own. And then you lose your job because if you don't have a fixed abode, where are you going to send your forms? Where are you going to say you're living? So it just spirals into so many issues.
I like also the way that you look at it, no? In that we need to see that there are actually causes, no? Because it is what we don't understand it that we begin to interpret it in a spiritual thing, or maybe that is the demons, maybe that is the grandmother in the village that they caused it. Because, okay, now, you see, in 2010, I wrote a book that I titled, "On the Development in Africa, My Hands Are Clean." That we often try to say that it is the fault of another person while it is not working. But you never try to look at where is your fault in it. That is the thesis of the book. Now, in the book, I was saying that, now let's look at road accident, for example. If we say road accident is caused by the witch, then we conclude that we don't have anything to do about it. But what if we revise that and say, okay, this road accident is caused because there is a bad road, or maybe in that road, the corner is too sharp. For this reason, the driver that is coming is not able to maneuver. That is why there is some accident. If we agree that this is the cause, then we can do something about it because the road was constructed by man. We can make the sharp corner to be more broad so that the driver can see far. If the road is broken, we can fix it. Because when we take the power that we have and give it to some mysterious power, give it to some mysterious thing, then we lose control. We can't control our situation anymore. But we can really control some of the things that are happening to us. This is why I think, like I was also saying before, that the work that the psychologists do, whether you look at it from the point of view of traditional African system or and the qualified psychologists in the West, they do basically exactly the same thing. Either they talk to you, they try to know what is happening to you. Based on what is happening to you, they know what can possibly lead to this mental illness. And if they know that is the cause, they can find a solution. For example, now, because you have talked to the psychologists, they now know that you are probably feeling bad because you have lost job. Now, they can't do any magic than just finding you a job. For example, if the system permits it, if you have a job, the problem of mental health will gradually die down. Of course, there are collateral causes because maybe the eye was bad. If it was bad for a very long time, then the eye can then degenerate to other parts of the body. Of course, if you resolve the eye's problem, it doesn't resolve other parts of the body. So gradually, it begins to build up. So it takes time, but it will work if we try to understand what is actually the cause. Now, the question I have for you, Mrs. Yemi, is from the people that you talk to, from the people that you have conversation with, what have you recommended to them as a solution to this problem of mental health?
Well, we were not in a position to give one solution. Where the space I worked in was social care. So that was like a day center where we provided different therapeutic activities to fill the gap when people were not at work. So, but in liaising with other professionals and going to care program meetings, there were so many issues. But what was beautiful about care program meetings was that there were people so I would be there representing the social care aspect. There'll be someone there that was a psychologist. There'll be someone there who was from housing. There'll be someone there from CAB, Citizen Advice Bureau, that will give legal advice or support. There'll be family members. So what used to happen is anything before they come into the meeting, they would have met the client or have formed a relationship. So the client would have expressed perhaps certain issues in the background, in the family that have caused certain problems or financial, whatever. So when we all come in, it's an opportunity for the doctor tends to be the lead person who would then raise these topics. And each professional would then take it on their role to provide a solution. Am I making sense? So like if the person is idle, lost their work, for example, some people were at home for 10, 11 hours, not doing anything, not cooking, I would recommend coming to the day center where I would help with maybe their bills, find work, training, have lunch, so on and so forth. Whilst if it's like a medical problem or housing, the housing officer would go away and find where they can find him or her suitable housing. So everyone worked together to create support. However, what happens as well, though, is before you get to that stage, a lot of people don't access, like in England, I see the GP as the gatekeeper. So if you have a problem, it's very important to have a doctor that supports you. So the first point of contact is your GP. So you go to your GP and say, this is what is happening. Many times, you might not necessarily need to be referred to a team of mental health professionals. The doctor might be able to, you might have such a good relationship where in talking as we are now, he might be able to ascertain what the main challenge is and refer you directly to the source of where you can get the solution. Many times it can be financial as well. So, but the most important thing is when you access your GP, that is your gate. I say to people, is your gatekeeper. It's not someone who just gives you medication or someone who's just down the road. They can empower you to gain access to services and give you different insights into different things. Because a lot of people, especially some people, don't want to go into the mental health system. So that means by going to your GP, you don't necessarily end up in the mental health team because there's issue around stigma, or if you're a professional, your GP might decide to refer you for counseling, or perhaps you need a career coach or something like that, rather than go the line of into the system. But in cases where I referred to people sitting amongst professionals, these are people who've had long enduring mental health problems where the system has picked them up along the line where they've gone in and out of hospital until perhaps a day center like ours would have broken the cycle. So there's different stages of it. But the most important thing is getting the support you need. And there are cases that are actual clinical cases where there's issues on the brain, there's genetics, there's so many other things as well that can impact people's mental health. But if you're susceptible to it, there's a chance some people are more susceptible to mental health challenges than others are, in spite of even getting the support. But that could be gleaned from your family history as well, and so on and so forth. I think there's so much to say, yeah.
I really appreciate that. Thank you. I appreciate your time. You see, this is very important. Of course, now we are moving towards another important argument, which is widowhood. But before we move, I just want to say that it is very important, this conversation and also the experience that you are sharing with us, because we're talking about our life, the human being. And a lot of the people in our community, I'm talking of the African Diaspora community, whether you are looking at those in the United States, looking at in Brazil or in London, in UK where you are, in Italy where I am, because I just told you what I see on the street. No, you go to Germany or you go to France, a lot of people are suffering, And this suffering, like we have discussed so far, the causes are many, So it is very important that we start by doing what has always worked, which is talking about it, because you never know. The person you talk about might be the right person that might just help you, because it is not a magic. This thing that is called mental health, it is not a magic. There are real causes. There are real causes that make your brain do what it's doing. So the best solution is if you feel something is strange, If you feel something that you are not used to feeling, talk to somebody. Of course, talk to somebody who is able to help you. Because you cannot solve all this problem alone. None of us can walk in the journey of life alone. Life was not supposed to be lived alone. We're supposed to live together. You help me, I help you. Anyway, we don't even need to go into the nitty-gritty of the African society today, because this is one of the things I really so love about the construction of a society in Africa. Because there, life is all of us together. Even though our politicians don't say that is how it is, but that is how it has always been. That is how we survive. Because if a problem is allowed to exist, it's going to destroy the society. Therefore, the society have a way of trying to find out what is the problem and resolve it. All right, now let's move to widowhood. This is another problem of the society. You have even written a book about it. Tell us about this project that you are working on.
Well, it's already out. You can get it on PayHip on a link of mine. Walking Out of Widowhood is a book I wrote. It's not so much about the loss, but it's about the solutions, how to find your way through widowhood, the loss of your spouse. And I look at different things, but the most important thing and the most challenging thing women face is financial. Because studies show that once a male has moved from the home, more or less half or more of the income has been lost. So it's about looking at how you're going to manage your finances. But in my book, I was fortunate to be one who was hands-on with my finances. So I say to people that when my husband passed, immediately in my head, I knew what I had to take out of my finances to make me stand okay. But not everyone is fortunate enough, because I've met people from different cultures where it was the man that took care of them. He offered to do it. Even though they were career people, he was the one who paid all the bills, did all the DIY, did everything. So when the man passed away, they were in total limbo. So they had to basically, it was like a career change. They had to learn everything about their household. So I talk about finance. I talk about the intention to walk out. I call it the conscious intention to walk out. And when I talk about walking out of widowhood, I don't mean the physical walking. I talk about the spiritual walking. I can always talk about my personal journey. And what I understand from my faith is when it was around a few months, I just felt I started to feel spiritually in myself that I could find my way through the loss, despite what was happening to me in my sight. But in having that vision, that was what enabled me. So once you have a vision of success, it gives you like a roadmap of where you're heading. So you have to have something. It's like when you have a goal. So you want to lose weight. So maybe you're 10 kg, but you want to lose 5 kg. But every day you start to see that you've lost a few pounds. You start to see you're getting closer and closer to the goal. And that's how I can explain it. You have to have an intention. You have to have a vision of how you want to see. It's not easy. I say to people, to widows, it's not an easy journey. But you have to have faith. Faith, when I talk about faith, I talk about Christian faith. And I also talk about faith in believing that you can walk a new life. You can walk a new road. But it's about believing that you can. You gather good people around you. You take out people, move people who are not adding to your life, because many times when you become a widow, you become quite vulnerable and people want to take advantage. So you have to make a conscious decision of who is adding to your life and who isn't. And you have to separate them and bring in good people that are going to build you up. And another key thing is perhaps get someone to walk alongside of you that has walked the journey, a role model of a widow. And that's one thing I did. I sought someone out and I walked alongside someone who'd raised their children and was doing quite well, because that also engineers your vision to do well. And though we're talking about widowhood today, it could be anything in our lives. What I would say is one of the downfalls in life is we pretend things are okay. So we don't reach for the help we need. Because of pride, many times it's pride. And one of the things you learn when you're a Christian woman or man is humility is key. If you can't be humble, you can never ask for help. And people tend to become so distressed in their problems that they break down. And unfortunately, you go into, in cases I've seen, I go into people's homes and I saw them perhaps a day or two, they seem fine, but what were they doing? They were pretending everything was fine until it becomes so much that they can't cope in their minds. They break down. So people keeping up appearances is pride that doesn't do anything for you, but to break you down.
I think that is going to remain a key part of this conversation, which is talking about it. I think that is a saying that a problem shared is a problem half solved. Because it is obvious, no? Because no one is, you cannot do it all alone. I really want to repeat that again because it is very important. All right, now before I have a few other questions to ask you there, but now tell me something. You see, the people that eventually become widow or widower were once husband or wife.
Of course.
Now, I don't want to believe that they really should be facing this issue. Okay, let's say because we are human beings. We are what we are talking about here. I really do not think it is right that we should be thinking about this only after it has happened. Okay, I mean, death is part of life. It is important that we talk about death while we are alive, not when we are dead. Because when you die, you don't live anymore. You don't talk anymore. When you die, of course, you don't feel pain anymore. But remember, you leave something behind. Maybe a wife, a husband, your children, your family. Those are the people that suffer because they carry your story along. So it is really very important that while you are still there, while you are still alive, I mean, let's talk about death. Because there is no way you can avoid it anyway. It's the only thing that is sure if you are alive. Dead people don't die. Okay, so this potential widow and widower, what are they supposed to do before it happens?
I think the most important thing is you see, the topic of widowhood, it depends on where you are in the world, where you're located, what access you have to insurance policies, how you are based financially. I'm saying that first before I start to say what I want to say. But in an ideal world where there's opportunities, where you have money and you have access to professionals, you should have life insurance. You should plan, you should have a will. You should plan, so if you have assets, you should plan clearly what you want your assets, where your assets are meant to be, who they're for, what you want to happen. And nowadays, it's even best to have a trust rather than a will, because many wills have been contested. Even when decent men and women have written wills, people contest it by family, in-laws, or whatever. So I would advocate for a trust. That's in an ideal world. In some settings that I'm now coming across in a lot of developing worlds, where there's a lot of poverty, some men or women have not had access or cannot have insurances or afford to have insurances. So the question is, what do they do? Or when they were even living alive, they were not basically living from hand to mouth. So what tends to happen is when the man dies, maybe they were living in a little house. Even the widow is even pushed out of the house by the in-laws, I'm hearing, in some parts of the world. So it depends on where you're at. So I'm just privileged to be where I am, where I can access insurance policies, or I grew up in a home where my father knew he had to write a will. But what do we say in communities where there's illiteracy, there's no education? There has to be programs there for grassroots to educate people on basic education, job opportunities. It's just phenomenal. The things that there's no certain infrastructures have to be set up for even people to even perceive or to know that they have to protect their future.
All right. Now, another thing that I really would like you to speak to is the issue of finance. Now, you see, we are in Europe. A lot of okay, let's say the women now, because the men also do it, but of course, since the European system favor more the women than the men, of course, the men become even more. They do it more. In that people feel they are comfortable by trying to live on the providences of the system, no? That you go to the government, they pay you money. So for this, you don't really think it is important for you to work on yourself and create something for yourself, because of course that takes extra energy. The way you need to suffer now because you are going to go above the average. So a lot of
Yes.
people that I know are in this sort of trap, no? Since we are trying to make sure that we have a quality life, because what the state is going to give you is to have the basic, no? So that you can be alive.
Yeah.
Because they don't want people, they have,
Yeah.
one thing that is beautiful about the Western lifestyle is that they want to give everybody the basic. And they have fought
Yeah.
very hard to make sure that it's available. Of course, we don't even have that in Africa, no? But we know that the
Yeah.
basic is not enough. We need life. We can decide what we want, no? You can pay for your bill. You can choose to live where you want to live. Of course,
Yeah.
not in affluence style, no? You will be able to do this if you pay the extra cost. With me, say maybe, for example, you come from Mozambique or you come from Nigeria, you come from Senegal, you are now found in Germany or in France or in UK, you can do something. Like, I don't know, try to requalify your educational background, get a job, instead of just rely on the benefit from the state, no? Because if that is what your family is relying on, you and your husband or your wife, if one of them goes, it's going to be more heavy for the one who is left behind. I'm saying this because you said before that one of the problems that you discover is finance. And I think that is really true because I've seen it too. So what I'm saying now is that can't we, right now, because we are still alive, try to work on ourselves so that we can have something to live by in case something happens? Because we are not sure of what is going to happen.
But the Bible does say a good man leaves a good inheritance to his children's children. There's so many issues here, but in terms of with the welfare states in England, the welfare state where you get benefit is only to sustain you until you find the job opportunity or training opportunity. But what tends to happen as well is some people become so reliant on it that they become complacent and do not, the dream or ambition they have seems to die. However, you have to continually be growing. So, and I even find that many times with issues, even in relationships and marriages, sometimes the men are not driven enough. They're not driven enough to find, okay, there's so many issues. Okay, there's so many issues. There's issues around immigration. Immigration is a big
Let's
one.
talk about it.
So
We are here to
some
talk about
people,
the issue.
yeah, so many things. There's immigration. So immigration ties a lot of men and women's hands down. Where a lot of Nigerians are very educated in England, but then sometimes they don't necessarily obtain employment for the level of what they've been educated at. Number three, as many leaders now in our communities in England are teaching, it's about educating yourself that you don't need a job. You can actually set up your own business. Number four, the internet has created so many opportunities to create wealth and be self-employed, But I find the biggest thing in terms of our communities is immigration. If there's an issue around immigration, it ties a lot of people's hands. However, a lot of people from my community, Nigerian community, are very ambitious. They work very hard. The average Nigerian that I know, I will at least have 1 degree or 2. However, it's also about picking degrees and study areas that are relevant, not necessarily the traditional areas to study. But there's a lot of things you can learn in terms of in the digital world now. And I'm so happy to see a lot of our young children coming up and learning from that angle rather than going into traditional professions where you get to a certain point financially and then there's no financial growth or access for growth. And the drudgery of work just grounds you down. And that can even make you have mental health problems. Because look what happened during the COVID. A lot of our doctors, care workers on the front line lost their lives because they were doing work on grassroots, and perhaps people were there for 10, 20 years and maybe didn't have the opportunity to leave or even find other opportunities. But I'm saying there's so much opportunities now.
Yeah, right. That is true. There is so much opportunity now in the world we live in today. So that you said it all, no? Because the internet is a leveler. In that with internet, wherever you are, if you are connected to internet, you can do a lot of things today. It is possible. All right, now let's go back to the real meat of this session of the conversation, which is widowhood, the loss of one part of the component of the marriage, which brings a lot of pain and a lot of distress. No, now I'm trying to understand the children that are left behind. What have you found on those parts? How do they manage to go on with their life?
I think what I've come across is women I've walked alongside me. If you're a woman who has vision and quite strong in your faith and strong in your vision for the future, the children thrive. I always believe that if your children see you're thriving, they thrive as well. However, what I did initially is when milestone passed, it's important to explore what is happening with your children emotionally and find the support they need. Like for me, I contacted their schools and found out what support to make them aware that this has happened. So as much as they're returning to school, the world doesn't look normal at this present time because of the loss of their dad. So what support do they have in the school? So I explored that, gained support for my children. And I did it all along the way. Even when they left certain schools, wherever I found there was an emotional gap, I tried to seek out help and get support. And then obviously got them to join groups, because the more active our children are, and the more you expose them to different kinds of children, the more they realize that what they think is a huge challenge in their lives, actually, they would hear more bigger stories that people have to share. And it becomes quite humbling. And you appreciate also other people's journeys and not just dwell as a victim in your own challenge as well.
Okay, thank you for that. In the course of this your work on widowhood, have you maybe see some people who maybe are here, because I'm trying to see if we can pay more attention to the African diaspora, no? Of course, it's still important in Africa, this particular conversation, no? Of course, we will really need more element to deal on it, no? Like the culture, the tradition, because all this one play very much on what happened and on the event when it has happened in Africa, no?
Yes.
But here, that does still play a part, but it's less heavy compared to what happens in Nigeria. Do you sometimes see people complain of pressure from home? Maybe, for example, they have lost their husband, now they are here alone, trying to raise the children. Is there like a kind of a pressure from home, maybe from the family of the man trying to do something that is against the will of these women, these widows?
Well, I've met different people. I mean, I came during being online and talking to widows. There was a case I came across of a woman who became widowed in a developed world, and all the property the man had, the in-laws apparently in Nigeria got documentation and went to claim the property in the courts in another country. So that meant she was actually driven out of her home with her children and so on and so forth. Then there's people in like East Africa that I've liaised with where the man died suddenly due to an illness, and then the business collapsed because they couldn't pay the loan back. Then that impacted on her credit. Then she lost her job because she had to stay with her children because they're quite young. Even though the mother is around, the mother lives far away. And then even as much as I do things online, some of the women cannot afford the Wi-Fi is too expensive. So that takes away from even the support they can get internationally or from whatever, because you don't have enough time. The benefit of the internet is you can communicate with anyone, even in your country. But then there's issues around the money to pay for the internet. But thank God for WhatsApp. People use more WhatsApp and stuff now. So you can share links and so on and so forth on that. Then I've come across cases where people have been beaten. There was a lady who was telling me that she doesn't have anything to eat. They've pushed her out of her house and her children. So many horror stories that I don't even want to share. It's not even worth thinking about. Yeah, so you come across that. So it's like from one side of the pendulum to the other, where widows are thriving perhaps in the West, but they're dwelling so much on the past, but they're comfortable. And there's people on the other pendulum where they're thriving, they want to seek a new vision, but they don't have the means to do it. or they haven't given the basis to do it. You know, the springboard. It's just so wide. It's such a wide area.
Of course, we are not going to talk so much on what is happening in Africa in respect of this argument, even though that actually might be very relevant, no? Because we are talking of the question of death, widower.
Yeah.
It is painful, like you said. It is really, really painful. But I think that both in our cultural value and in our tradition, our way of life, we should look for a way to protect those who are left behind. We should look for a way to make sure that life is worth living for them, instead of try to abuse them, try to basically take advantage of them, because this happens in most of the cases. Sometimes they use the culture, sometimes they use the law even to make sure that those who are not strong enough to stand for themselves are taking advantage of it. Most of these cases, the women. So let's be specific on that. But then I have a question. Say this man had debt, say maybe like $1 million debt. Will this family gather together to take the money, to pay the money so that the woman will not pay it? Or would they leave the money to the woman to pay?
They would take the money. Well, the cases I've come across, they believe that from once, what I don't understand is when a woman marries a man, wherever you are around the world, you become one. That's what the Bible says. So everything he owns is yours. So even because the case in question where the in-laws claimed the property, what I've come to understand is that they were saying the name was Mr. So-and-so rather than Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, but that shouldn't matter. The bottom line is there's a document showing that they were married, they were legally married. So nowadays, a lot of people, even people that haven't been widowed, are saying they make sure all their documentation and property says Mr. and Mrs., because they're afraid when death comes, and even though there's a will, people might want to lay claims on those properties. I've even told people that they better make sure there's 2 names on it. And that doesn't guarantee people might not want to take you to court for it. They might even claim that the will was made when he was of sound mind.
All right. Now, talking of what happened after the death now, I am going to rephrase the question that I asked to you before, because probably I wasn't clear enough on it.
Okay.
All right. Now, say the man that died is Mr. AZ, no? Had $1 million to pay to a company. He died. The family is now in debt. The extended family gather the money and pay the debt, or they will leave it for the family, the bereaved family, the woman, the widow, to pay the debt? That is what I'm asking.
I mean, there's been different cases. Like some in-laws would pay it. I've had cases where people paid off things for the wife that lost the husband, and perhaps there are cases where they didn't. So I would say, in a sense, I always say in everything I talk about, in everything in our lives, there's always good and bad. No matter how bad things are, there's always an element of good. So even when I talk about widows, not every in-law wants to kick their daughter-in-law out or whatever. There are families that support. Like I got a lot of support when my husband died in different ways. I know people who still get support from their in-laws, and they still support the children continuously. And then I've heard of people who never got support. So it's both ways, really.
And when you share, okay, now what actually I'm trying to get from this particular point now is the work that you are doing is not only legal or only how do I put it, only psychological, but it's also cultural, no? There is a bit of it that is religious, but there is a strong part of it that is cultural, no? Now, is there any way that your cultural understanding of where you are coming from influence how you approach this work?
Well, you can't. One thing I've learned is I can't afford for my own cultural influence to influence what I'm doing. So like if I'm talking with a widow in England, that is where I am. I can relate to that. If I'm talking to a widow in Kenya, I have to go and learn about what the challenges are there. I can't apply my current setting with there because their challenges might be different as my challenges would be. So I have to adapt it to each cultural setting. But the commonality, though, is even though there's cultural challenges, all the elements are very similar in terms of the pain, in terms of people clinging to faith, in terms of lack of money, in terms of the children's needs and support, and in terms of the isolation as well, and the mindset, the need to shift your mindset and strengthen your mind. Those elements, whatever culture we find ourselves, those things still become apparent, and how we manage the loss. So there's issues around self-pity. It could be in Kenya, it could be in England. There's issues around people who are praying, but not doing anything. It could be in England, it could be in Kenya, it could be in Nigeria. So that's how I see it holistically.
All right.
But when people say things to me, you have to educate yourself on the background. Yeah, sorry.
All right. Thank you very much for that. Now, I'm going to ask you the last thing here, then we'll move to your coaching to conclude the conversation. All right.
Okay.
The people that come to you at the end of the day, what do they usually get from it after this program? What usually happens to them?
Okay. What I would want to say to you initially is where I am at in coaching is fairly quite new, because when the pandemic came in, I decided to set up my business as a grief and life coach. So I've done a lot of work online, and when I'm even talking to people, I do it remotely. Whilst in my old job before the pandemic, I was fortunate in mental health to meet people in groups in physical rooms. So it's quite different. So the work I've done to date is I tend to do a lot of educational work on my podcast. And then I wrote a blog as well, which is for people who have just recently, when I recently lost my husband, I wrote a blog for maybe for a year. And that talks about my journey and how to navigate your growth and the loss. But with my podcast now and relating to my coaching, it's like I look at after 3 years, where do you want to go? You can't continue to dwell on the loss. What do you want your life to be like? So I look at things like, do you need to enhance your finances? Would you want to be in a new relationship? How do you shift the mindset from the past to walking into your present? Claim a new mindset, believing you are worthy to be loved again and to love another. How do you leave the bones, the ashes from behind and walk into something more beautiful? So those are things I look at when I'm talking on my podcast and introducing my coaching service. So the coaching, initially I introduced the service for 3 months, but I noticed because of the pandemic and finances, people might not be able to afford it. So I've reduced. So one of my packages now is for 6 weeks. And it basically looks at the blockages, because when in life generally, we have limitations, which we are not aware of. But what I say is when you then have loss, where you were part of two and you unified and then you lose part of you, your mindset definitely becomes shaken, because you can experience issues around confidence. Your confidence can wane. Your image, your self-image also is affected. In certain communities where people feel like marriage is the all and be all, you can start to feel like you can't interact in certain communities. So there's so many issues, even around dating. Where do you begin? What if I find the wrong person? I don't want to marry yet. Maybe I should. So many things. But I say to people, widows, that I believe there's something about reinventing yourself. Reinventing yourself would start from where you live. Change your environment. Try to revamp your environment. Perhaps change yourself, your hairstyle, self-care, enhance your self-care, take more care of yourself. The more you do that, the more the glass you look through becomes much clearer for your future. If the glass you're looking through is blurred because of your emotional baggage, you're still recovering, you're still working your grief, you cannot write out a map plan for your future. But what coaching does is, I work with people who have been widowed at least a year or two, because under a year, you're still in the throes of grief. But from 2 to 3 years, you start to move into an area I call transformation, where you're perhaps open to looking at new areas of income, looking at perhaps dating again. You're open to date again. Why not? Because if people are living to, I said to me, if you're going to live to 120 and you were widowed at 40, so that means you're going to be widowed till another more or less, how many years? 80 years or more? So it's a long time to be on your own, and your children grow up. Our children are very resilient. I find no matter what loss we go through, as long as you are okay, no matter where you're presenting it, our children have a fighting spirit. If anything, I found the adversity made my children more driven to grab life more than ever before. Whilst many times when we haven't been challenged in our lives, we tend to not be as driven. We tend to sit back a bit. Whilst adversity, disappointment makes us more hungry for life, because you see what you've lost and you want to grab at life more. And that's what I mean when I talk about finding purpose out of loss. You've lost your spouse. You have to find something greater to give you meaning in your life. If it means setting up a project that will be your husband's name to help the children of widows, it could be educating on people doing soft skills, training, whatever is your forte, whatever is your gifting, is the purpose you have. Was there before, and it will come out more greater when you dig deeper for it.
How can people find your courses? Where are they available?
Well, the best place to go to find my work it's at businessandmarriagecoaching.co.uk. Right. You will find me there. You'll find all my links, my LinkedIn, my Instagram pages. You'll find everything you need to find. You'll find it on there.
All right. Now, there is something that I found very important. I think you made mention of the word purpose a number of times in this podcast. Yeah. And then, really through your words, your work online, I find also a kind of a combination of it. I think you said something like redefining your pain and loss to a greater purpose. What would you like to say about that as we conclude this podcast?
I think, as we've said before, like life would always throw us different curveballs. And one we're talking about today is about widowhood. But I say once you're still, the main thing is your husband has passed, but you're still alive. And the fact that the Lord has made you here, kept you here, there must be a greater need and a greater purpose for you. So what you might find is you might have been an accountant before, where your husband died, and all of a sudden, the need, you might have added a skill to write. You might start writing to a certain audience that perhaps you never realized you could do before he died. There's always something in your hand that you haven't explored that you can use to recover and also serve human beings in the world that we're in. So that is the purpose I talk about. To the widows listening, wherever you are, whatever stage you're at, if you're in the stage of grief, that will pass. When you get to recovery, that will pass. Your children will grow. They will grow and they will succeed, because the pain we go through makes them more driven. And just dare to dream a greater dream. Even if you can't see it now, have a dream of what you want your life to be and start to do one thing every day that will get you closer to that dream. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yemi. This is where we come to the end of the podcast. I really appreciate the time and the sharing.
Thank you for having me.